So bubble plots, when we've got to do multi-dimensional product data, as we saw in the last lecture, we construct bubble plots. So the data is exactly the same as before. We read it in and construct this summary data frame, just as we did last week, and in fact in lecture 4. And then in order to, just like we did with the bubble plots last week, in order to turn a scatter plot into a bubble plot, we just need to set the bubble size in another column. Okay, so then you can see that I'm passing in the bubble size. So X is showing the profit for this particular chart. It's showing the profit on the X-axis, it's showing the advertising on the Y-axis, and the bubble size is then being used to determine the size of the dots, and that's based on the sales data. So that's calculated from the sales data using this, using some sort of scaling factor that I have to determine manually just by trying out different values and finding one that seems to be appropriate. And that's what it looks like. It's also very useful to include these parameters, so we can, for example, put the alpha in to make them transparent, semi-transparent. I can put padding to stop bubbles from overlapping the edge of the plot. Annoyingly, they will overlap unless I pad the whole plot, so that expands the size of the plot so that they don't overlap. And hover calls just means that the hover tool will display all the possible values. So if you remember, each of these dots represents a product. Let me show you that actually in an actual interactive example. Each of these bubbles represents a product, and we're viewing, the profit on the bottom, the advertising on the y-axis, and the sales as the bubble size. But that doesn't tell me about, say, for example, what are the other features? So the price. It doesn't tell me about the price. It doesn't tell me about the cost. I can kind of work out some of those things from the profit, but it doesn't tell me exactly what those values are. So by putting the hover calls to be all of them, that will pick out all the features of each bubble and tell me what they are. So you can see that the profit in this case, let's look at this one, the profit, or in fact there's two there sitting on top of each other. Let's zoom into that one. So there they are. You can see I've got two bubbles there, W and G. Let's make that a bit bigger. W and G, and the price of W is 48 and the price of G is 29. Okay, but the marketing is very different and the cost is very different for each of those. So we can get details. We can hover in and zoom in and get details for each bubble, and it'll tell us all the information, including the bubble size, which we kind of don't really need the bubble size. That's the calculated scaled variable, but it'll tell us that as well. Okay, and then if we want to put limit lines in, as we did before, we can use we can create horizontal lines using holoviews.hline. Okay, so if you remember, we did this before. So to get a sense of where the limits were for each different thing, let me show you that running. So there it is. Let's zoom out again, and the limit lines were showing me the different amounts of amounts spent on advertising. So £2 per unit, £1 per unit, and that showed me where they were. And I can compose all those plots together. So essentially, I'm creating 5 plots there. One is the bubble plot, but then the other 4 lines are the other 4 plots. So I compose them all one on top of each other and then show them. And there it is. I don't think that's a particularly helpful example, actually. I think a better one is the marketing sales profit one, which gave us a chart like that. We've seen this several times before. Okay, and then if you want to do lines on that one, which we found were quite useful for determining where the sort of standard amount of marketing spend was and where it was very high marketing spend, very low marketing spend. You have to use HV curve, and the reason is that these lines that we're going to put on are not horizontal. So if you remember these lines, we used them before. I'm deciding some values for where these lines should go. So for example, this line, it goes from 0, 0 to 40,000, 40,000, which is just a straight line where x equals y. And since the, let me show you that plot. Since on the x-axis we've got marketing, and on the y-axis we've got sales, setting a line, this red line here, where x equals y, so for £40,000 spent on marketing, you get 40,000 sales. That therefore is telling me something about how the plot is divided up. And if you remember, we're able to see that most of the values fall in this region between pound per unit and 50p per unit, just by determining these lines. It's me who's choosing these lines. Remember, these lines are chosen by me to represent possible ways of splitting up that chart. And then I can see that most of the values lie between here, and we've got some outliers down the bottom here, which I can zoom in on now. So I can zoom in on those outliers down the bottom, or if I reset, I can zoom in on the outliers at the top where it's very low, very high sales, but very low marketing. Okay, so we can do that option as well. So I think I'm going to finish that video there, and then we'll just finish off the lecture with some summary and some information about how we use this in Colab and Jupyter.